In this very second, a billion-dollar dream is quietly being deleted from a server in Silicon Valley. It doesn't happen with a bang or a public protest. It happens with a final, somber Slack message and a legal filing that turns a unicorn into a ghost. We were told that the 2020s would be the golden age of innovation, a decade where disruption was the only currency that mattered. But as we cross into 2026, the landscape looks less like a tech utopia and more like a high-speed car crash in slow motion. The startup cemetery is no longer a metaphor. It is a sprawling, overcrowded reality filled with companies that had world-class branding, celebrity endorsements, and absolutely no way to actually make a profit. We are witnessing the most brutal correction in the history of venture capital, where the survival rate has plummeted to a terrifying 10%. The question isn't just why these companies are failing, but why they were designed to fail from the very first line of code. For a decade, the playbook was simple: move fast and break things. It was a philosophy born in an era of zero interest rates, where money was essentially free, and growth was the only metric that justified evaluation. If you could show a graph pointing up and to the right, it didn't matter if you were losing 50 cents on every dollar you made. Investors were happy to subsidize your losses because they were betting on a future monopoly that never actually arrived. This growth at all costs model created a generation of fragile giants, businesses that were effectively addicted to venture capital injections just to keep the lights on. But the free money dried up, the interest rates climbed, and suddenly, the unicorns found themselves in a desert with no water. The transition from a world of infinite capital to a world of fiscal discipline has been nothing short of a massacre. Walk through the digital halls of the startup cemetery, and you'll see the same patterns of rot. You'll see companies that spent millions on Super Bowl ads before they even had a functioning product. You'll see disruptors that were really just traditional service businesses hidden behind a shiny app interface, pretending to be tech companies to get tech-sized valuations. The fundamental lie of the last 5 years was the idea that software could solve every human problem without the messy reality of unit economics. When you peel back the layers of a 2026 failure, you rarely find a lack of talent or a bad idea. You find a burn rate that was physically impossible to sustain. Founders were encouraged to hire hundreds of employees they didn't need and lease glass-walled offices they couldn't afford, all to project an image of scale. Quote, "In the end, they didn't scale their impact. They only scaled their disaster." The psychological toll of this era cannot be overstated. We built a culture that celebrated the hustle while ignoring the math. Founders were treated like rock stars, pressured by board members to spend faster and pivot harder, until the original mission was lost in a fog of vanity metrics. By the time the market shifted in 2024 and 2025, many of these startups were already too heavy to turn around. They were like massive tankers with no fuel, drifting toward the rocks, while the captain and crew argued about the font on their pitch deck. The unicorn status, once the ultimate mark of success, became a scarlet letter. A billion-dollar valuation is a heavy weight to carry when your actual revenue is barely enough to cover the office catering bill. The pressure to live up to an inflated price tag forced founders into desperate moves. Fraudulent reporting, predatory pricing, and ultimate burnout. As we navigate 2026, the AI gold rush has added another layer of complexity to the carnage. Thousands of startups launched in the last 2 years claiming to be AI first, but many were just thin wrappers around existing large language models. They were the digital equivalent of a gold miner buying a shovel and calling it a mining empire. When the novelty wore off and the big tech players integrated those same features for free, the AI unicorns evaporated. The market has become ruthless at identifying feature companies that lack a, quote, product moat. Quote, "If your business can be rendered obsolete by a single software update from a trillion-dollar incumbent, you aren't a disruptor, you're a temporary convenience." The graveyard is now filling with these wrappers, proving that even the most advanced technology can't save a business model that has no soul and no sustainable margin. The ripple effect of these failures is tearing through the economy. It's not just the founders and the venture capitalists losing money. It's the tens of thousands of employees who were promised equity that is now worth less than the paper it's printed on. It's the local economies that relied on tech spending, and the consumers who built their lives around services that are suddenly being shut down. We're seeing a great deflation of expectations. The dream of the 22-year-old billionaire in a hoodie is being replaced by a much grimmer reality. The mid-30s founder trying to explain to their family why their 5 years of 80-hour weeks resulted in a liquidated status. The startup cemetery is a quiet place, but it is filled with the echoes of broken promises and the crushing weight of wasted potential. Why did we let this happen? Because the system was incentivized to ignore the truth. Venture capital firms needed to deploy massive amounts of capital to justify their own existence, so they pushed for bigger rounds and higher valuations. Media outlets needed unicorn stories to drive clicks, so they built up idols without checking the foundations. And we, the public, were enamored with the convenience of subsidized lifestyle apps, never asking who was paying for our cheap rides and food deliveries. We were all complicit in a hallucination that growth was the same thing as value. Quote, "Now, as the lights come on and the music stops, we are left staring at the bill. The failure rate isn't high because the world stopped innovating. It's high because we stopped valuing the basic principles of business, making something people want, and selling it for more than it costs to produce." But even in this brutal environment, there is a lesson being learned. The survivors of 2026 are a different breed. They aren't unicorns, they are camels. Quote, "They are designed to survive in the desert for long periods without external sustenance. They focus on profitability from day one. They hire slowly and intentionally. They don't care about being disruptive as much as they care about being indispensable." Quote, "These companies are building their foundations on the ruins of the failed giants, proving that true innovation doesn't require a billion-dollar burn rate." The death of the unicorn isn't the end of the tech industry. It is the painful, necessary birth of a more mature, honest era of entrepreneurship. The graveyard is full, but the soil is being fertilized by the mistakes of the past. The next few years will be defined by the great cleanup. Quote, "We will see more high-profile collapses, more dramatic exits, and more stories of the next big thing turning into nothing." It is a terrifying time for those still trapped in the old model, trying to bridge the gap between their inflated ego and their empty bank account. The era of faking it until you make it is officially over, replaced by a world where you either have the numbers or you have the exit door. As we look at the wreckage of the 2020s, we have to realize that the 90% failure rate isn't a glitch in the system. It is the system finally working as intended. It is the market purging the noise to find the signal. It is the brutal, necessary math of reality asserting itself over the fantasy of the unicorn. If you're a founder, a worker, or an investor in this landscape, the message is clear. The ground has shifted. The strategies that won in 2021 are the same ones that will kill you in 2026. The cemetery is always looking for new residents, and it has a special place reserved for those who refuse to look at their own balance sheets. We are moving toward a future where the most radical thing a startup can do is actually make a profit. It's not as sexy as a billion-dollar valuation, and it won't get you a cover story in a business magazine. But it's the only way to stay out of the graveyard. The unicorn is dead, and perhaps it's for the best. We don't need more mythical creatures. We need real businesses that solve real problems and can stand on their own 2 feet without a venture capital crutch. The death of the unicorn is a tragedy of wasted billions, but it is also a roadmap for what comes next. The survivors aren't the ones who grew the fastest. They are the ones who refuse to die. In the end, the most brutal part of the failure rate isn't the loss of money. It's the realization that we could have built something that lasted. If only we hadn't been so obsessed with building something that looked big. The gates of the startup cemetery are open, and the silence inside is the loudest warning we've ever been given.